Hey, everybody, welcome to the Supernatural Beer Bros podcast. I'm your host, Andy, and I'm joined today by Ben down San Diego way.
Ho.
Howdy ho, neighbor. You look like Wilson.
Wilson!
Not that Wilson. The one from
Maybe that's
the one from Home Improvement.
I'll take that.
The neighbor Wilson. With that
Yeah.
flannel and the flannel hat. You look like Wilson.
Don't you know?
Well, howdy ho.
Don't you know it?
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
So today, I guess we're going to be rolling through some stories of some wartime monster sightings and experiences.
Perfect.
Something
Little
like
combination of histoire and supernatural.
history, sort of.
Histoire.
His story.
That's why it's not her story.
His being the victors.
Yeah. Him or her, it doesn't matter. It's the winners who write the history. So.
Oh yeah. Shouldn't you?
And the monsters apparently are never the story.
Yep.
Wow.
Anyway, what is this? Oh, I was reading the yeah. Okay. So you want to kick it off with the Afghan monster?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we're going to be reading a little take here. This is what website am I on here? The Paranormal Scholar. Battlefield Horrors, 5 terrifying wartime monster sightings. Interesting. Number 5, the Afghan monster. A relatively recent report of a wartime monster sighting comes from an anonymous U.S. Army Special Forces squad member who was tracking a Taliban person of interest in the mountains of Afghanistan. The squad's objective at the time was to observe a village for several days in the hopes of witnessing suspicious activity or persons, which was hoped would inform the lead to a successful raid. The team comprised of 6 men at the base, with 2 others whose job it was to observe the village at closer quarters. Over the course of a few days, suspicious activity was indeed witnessed by the squad, but not the sort they were expecting. Almost immediately, the team experienced technical problems. They had trouble maintaining radio contact due to static. Believing the magnetic content of the rocks to be the issue, the eyewitness describes leaving the squad's base with some of the other men to reposition the SATCOM in an attempt to get a better signal. It was around dusk at the time. As they neared the SATCOM, one of the soldiers spotted a man in a white robe running through the rocks outside the village. See, I keep tripping up on this because there's a lot of typos. Lacking reliable communication and worried about the mission being compromised, the men packed up their equipment and got ready to move. They were all on high alert as they trekked back to their outpost. Covering their tracks as they moved through the darkness, the witness stressed the carefulness with which they retreated. Regardless, every so often he claims that he would catch a fleeting glimpse of something white moving in the distance. After a short while, he reported that he had seen to the others. An officer said that he had seen the same thing. They were being followed. The sense of urgency and panic increased. They were a small unit completely exposed without a means of communications. Not only that, the witness reports that everything felt strange. The air felt heavy and sort of sweet. The silence hummed loudly. You know, this is starting to sound more and more like a haunting and not a monster. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, but It's just as potential, especially if it's a poltergeist and it might as well be a monster.
Mm,
If it can harm you and it's otherworldly, then
yeah. Now enveloped in the darkness of the night, the team put on their night vision goggles, with the world cast in a perfect green haze. They scouted their surroundings. The men could see nothing and no one moving behind them. However, the danger of the night was far from concluded. What the witness described or describes has happened has having happened next is chilling. Um, yeah, I don't know. This guy doesn't have a firm grasp on the English language. All right, hallucinations happen. This is
Yaksimash.
okay. This is a quote. Hallucinations happen, but what happened was beyond comprehension. First, we heard a sound like a huge airplane taking off, a loud, low buzz that slowly increased in pitch. We had to yell over comms to hear each other. Everywhere I looked, seeing what looked like glowing eyes staring back at me, but once I would center my focus on where I saw them, they would disappear. We were panicked. Everyone was holding their rifles at high ready. We were expecting some sort of ambush attack. Then it all just stopped. Everything got dark. The only thing I could hear was my breath and the blood pumping in my head. We stopped, dug into the side of the mountain, and performed SLLS, which is stop, look, listen, and smell, for about 10 minutes. Nothing, not even bugs. The air and the land was silent. You good, bro? Sounds like you're
Reading.
sounds like you're sneezing up a storm or something.
No, just have a residual cough. Keep reading.
Oh, still from the vid.
From the coof, the kung flu,
The China virus.
China.
China. So,
Sometimes I just miss the way he says China.
uh, so the team was thoroughly spooked and overcome with fatigue and eager to get back to camp. However, they were very aware that something waited in the darkness for them, something which very possibly had intentions to harm them. They moved quickly through the scrub until they were met by the sight of a man dressed in light colored robes. The man was slowly making his way toward them. According to the witness, the way that he moved was unnatural. He seemed to pass through any and all obstacles in his way as though they were made of air. He seemed to melt. This is the quote now. He seemed to melt over and around the rocks. Through the nods, which is the night vision goggles, his eyes glowed. I scoped up on him and saw that he was looking directly at me. It was pitch black. There was no way he could have seen us from that distance without any sort of night optics. Suddenly he stopped. He picked up one of his limbs and held it in the air, almost like he was waving at me. Then the arm melted back into his form, like it wasn't an arm at all, but some kind of extendable proboscis that was meant to look like an arm from a distance. I was about to ask the guys if they could see him when he suddenly disappeared. Hmm.
Wild. And they said this was in Afghanistan.
Yeah. So after he disappeared, the team, shaken and weary beyond words, were able to finally make their way back to the base. In the distance, they saw lights flickering near the village. They all but forgot about both this and the strange otherworldly man until a few days later. According to the witness, on that very night, obser- the village they had been observing was raided. However, it was not the raid that they had been working to inform. Okay, whatever that means. Quote, apparently, the team that moved into the village found it completely abandoned. They also found several men in the area where I had seen the lights that night. The corpses had been ripped to shreds, and based on the sheer amount of blood, the general consensus was that there were more men that were killed there than just the bodies that were found. It went in the official records as a successful raid with several enemy KIAs, unofficially. No one has any idea what killed them. All I know is whatever it was, it chose. It chose those men and not us.
Wild.
Crazy. Yeah. Anyway, that sounds like some kind of a free roaming haunting that's not tethered to any specific location. Or if it is a specific location, it's a much larger location or geographical area than just a building, or you know what I mean? This thing can roam the mountains in that general vicinity. That's what I think. Or it's an alien. Could be an alien too. I've heard of aliens walking through walls and shit. No reason to think they couldn't walk through rocks and trees. What do you think? Demon?
Yeah, probably. I mean, again, if it like breaks that third wall and hurts you, then that counts as kind of monstrous. But
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think, like, right off the bat, when they were talking about radio interference, which implies some kind of an electromagnetic field in the area, maybe interfering with their communications, right? And satellite communications were down. Apparently, they still had their their individual comms between themselves. You know what I mean? How they communicate over their personal radios, like short range. Apparently, those were still working because he said that they were talking, yelling at each other over their comms. So that means they have personal comms on there for their squad. um, I don't know. Could be a UFO or an alien, or it could be
right.
some kind of a supernatural entity was manifesting itself there.
So yeah, thinking of Battlefield, so there's a lot, not surprisingly, a lot of spooky stories, especially from the Great War, also the name of the First World War. So one of the big ones that I've heard of is this whole situation of like ghouls who were living in no man's land. So, according to various legends surrounding the wild men, some people describe them as the wild men of no man's land. They were allegedly groups of deserters from all nations who had banded together. So I guess potentially they just decided they didn't want to fight or kill each other anymore. But they're saying that they were in no man's land, so maybe in like the shell holes, maybe in abandoned trenches. Um, some say it might have been to renounce war and try to survive as human beings. One of the other possibilities that they were obviously raving lunatics, and which is possible because they were probably so shell shocked that they ceased to be human in their minds, and they renounced civilization and lived by stealing, killing, and cannibalizing. Um, but yeah, so this one Redditor had posted, and this is a very common story. So this one Redditor had said that his great grandfather had been been in no man's land. He was a veteran of World War One. He used to tell him stories about the war and what it was like. He talked a lot about life in the trenches and how awful the food was and how boring it could be just sitting there waiting to die. He talked a lot about the diseases that ravaged the trenches like cholera. Occasionally, he would mention the looming specter that was no man's land. He didn't like to talk about it, except to say that it was a constant threat and everyone avoided it, unless obviously you were ordered to go over the top. Just looking over the edge of the trench could get you shot in the head, so looking out into no man's land was a rare occurrence. A few months before he died, my great grandfather finally told me about an encounter he had in no man's land. I've changed some of the names involved out of respect for privacy. He was involved in a highly secretive early attempt to develop night vision technologies. Officially, night vision wasn't used until World War II, but unofficially, he was allegedly a part of the early experiments. He showed me some photographs of his equipment. It was a large backpack strapped to his back, containing many, many heavy batteries. A cable emerged from the side of the pack and went into a large handheld flashlight. It looked like one of those old-fashioned camera flash bulbs. And so he just goes into describing further about this night vision. A group of 3 men, my great grandfather and 2 others included, ventured out into no man's land in an attempt to photograph a German position and return with photographs. Everything went exactly as planned until they set out to return. In the middle of no man's land, an explosion rocked the night. One of the 2 men with my great grandfather had accidentally stepped on a landmine and blown his foot clean off. They applied a tourniquet to his leg. First thing we heard was the sound of hurried footsteps on the edge of the darkness moving quickly around them. He turned the camera and light system and began snapping photographs of the darkness around them. He frantically grabbed the images as they emerged from the wet dark room, whirling around and trying to get a clear image of the situation almost as fast as the camera spat out pictures. The photos revealed a group of humanoid figures crowding around them in the dark. He spun wildly around as the hurried footsteps turned into low growls. Whoever was prowling around in the night around them was now growling at them, a low and angry sound. Each photograph he took revealed the figures inching closer. They started to become clearer. He saw human faces, devoid of any semblance to humanity. The figures walked like a person, but what he saw in their eyes was not humanity. They were gaunt and starved, stomachs bloated with hunger. There was no intelligent thought behind those eyes. He said it was like looking into a wolf's eyes. They were wolves probably have fire in them, so he means zombies essentially. They
Zombie.
were dre-
Sounds like a zombie.
they were dressed in the tattered remains of soldiers' uniforms torn up by razor wire and bullets from countless nationalities. Their faces were pockmarked by scars, some were missing fingers, other entire limbs. Some had fresh open wounds, and others were oozing with pus and blood from wounds that never closed.
Zombies.
As this person finished applying the tourniquet, my great grandfather urged him to move. This person was also trying to stifle the moans of pain, his moans of pain, a whiny and pitiful sound that only seemed to urge the menacing figures onwards. They started charging, each photo revealing a new face snarling in the anger as they ran past, veering off at the last second. Let's see.
Zombies.
One of the figures did not veer off. It collided with this person named Charlie and threw him to the ground. The rest of the crowd seized on the moment and descended on this person named John with a mad frenzy, his whimpering moans turning into fearful shrieks. The night was filled with mad barking sounds and baying like dogs as the ghouls fought over John's body. His cries were quickly silenced. My great-grandfather whirled around and turned his camera on the scene. Each new photo a horrifying scene. So let's see here. So the ghouls are ripping pieces off of John, huge handfuls of flesh and gristle, dripping with fat and blood. And someone bit into his throat. That was his last sound. The cause of his last sound. Yeah, it was apparently allegedly a very terrifying scene. Even the Germans would be preferable to being torn apart and eaten. Their inhuman pursuers broke away one by one as they ran towards barricades that covered the American trenches. The disfigured pursuers disappeared back into the darkness and carnage of no man's land. My great grandfather arrived back to the American trenches, grasping for breath and shuddering in fear, with Charlie hot on his heel. So, and this one person replied, your great grandfather survived a run in with a pack of ghouls, like genuine ghouls. See, the difference between a zombie and a ghoul is that zombies will eat anything, person, animal, whatever, alive or dead. Ghouls feast upon the dead and dying, and only human beings. I didn't know that. Well, they did chase him. I'm not sure if they'd have eaten him. Probably why they broke off pursuit. They were just chasing him off the meal. Ghouls have a tendency to loiter around places like battlefields and graveyards, so no man's land was like a Chinese buffet to your average American.
Zombie.
So
I hate zombies.
apparently not a zombie, it's a ghoul.
Same difference.
The Lord tells me he can get me out of this mess, but he's pretty sure you're fucked.
I bet that's what that guy was saying as the other guy was getting eaten by the zombies.
You're fucked.
Oh, that's your executive order authorizing full use of our nuclear.
That's what I'd
I
be.
mean, like, it's so crazy, but like World War II obviously had like tens of millions of more deaths. But it's like World War I just seems so much utterly horrifying because of the trench warfare in no man's land.
Well, yeah. I mean, World War II was. I think there was some trench work there, but not nearly as much as World War One. World War II was mostly maneuver, but yeah, trench warfare, like the artillery and chemical weapons that were used, and the mindless charging across open ground against trenches full of machine guns. Just you had no control over what happened to you at all. It was total luck whether you survived or not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
That just seems like
yeah,
it's
it
terrifying.
just it is terrifying, and that's what I mean. Like there were so many more deaths in the Second World War, but just because of those stupid ass mass charges, that's what makes it seem so much more awful.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that um, based on time frames per casualties, I think World War One's got World War Two beat by a lot. I mean, they'd have 50, 100,000 casualties in a day in battles in World War One. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, is well, and that's the thing because like the Europeans had been so used to fighting like tribal people for like 40 years. Because that's basically what they did right after the what was it, Franco-Prussian War ended in 1871, is that Europe agreed to stop fighting each other. It's like, hey, let's focus on our colonies instead. So who were they fighting for 40 years? They were fighting Chinese rebels. They were fighting African tribesmen, people who they technologically outmatched by leagues, and they were just, wholesale killing them with ease. So when they turned the guns on each other, they thought it was going to be like how they treated tribesmen in Africa, but they fafoed.
Yeah.
They definitely fafoed. They did not know, like, and it's not like a slow buildup either. Like how during the Civil War it was like a few skirmishes. Even Bull Run wasn't that horrible compared to other battles because it was so pitiful and mismatched. Like the first battles in 1914 already had like tens or hundreds of thousands of casualties. Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, but even in the 1860s, the rifles we had then were far too accurate to be fighting the way they were fighting. You know what I mean? The reason they stood in lines like that back during the revolution and before was they were shooting smoothbore fucking muskets and they weren't accurate worth a shit. You couldn't hit the
yep,
side of a barn with them. So the only way you were going to hit anybody was if you had the other side and your side standing in fucking lines, shoulder to shoulder.
yep, basically, yep. The
So
mass,
once they came up with the conical ball and all that shit and the rifled barrels, The Civil War rifles were accurate to what, 300 yards?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. See, that's like, I mean, our rifles today are accurate a lot longer distances than that, but most engagements happen inside of, I think it's 100 yards, at least in our current wars, or well, our most recent wars. So you don't really need to be accurate much past there. And you damn sure
Yeah.
wouldn't be fighting shoulder to shoulder the way they did back then with the weapons we have now. It'd be an absolute slaughter. No one would survive.
Well, I mean, ideally, the only kind of like mass land warfare should be over. It's really, if humanity was smart, it's just going to be like, special teams of small special teams of operators taking each other on. It's not going to be hundreds of thousands of people fighting against. Like, I don't even know in Ukraine. I still think it must be like small bands fighting against each other. I doubt it's like hundreds of thousands fighting
Well,
simultaneously.
and until maybe another couple of weeks after the ground freezes, then Russia's going to send in like 1 million fucking troops and tanks and everything else.
To be seen, but it's just astonishing to me that like the people, like the military planners prior to World War One, didn't realize that. Like, someone must have been at those meetings where it's like, well, with this machine gun, the mass attack would be a disaster, and they probably fucking canned that guy and sent him to an administrative post in India or something.
Well, yeah, and then plus the artillery was a lot better, and plus the chemical weapons, mustard gas, and everything else they were using was mostly mustard gas they were using, right? So,
Yeah,
um, the
but
gas
someone
exactly.
had someone had to have known that this is a horrible idea.
Well, yeah, I mean the way that we were fighting World War One wasn't that different from how we fought the Civil War or the Napoleon Wars. The only difference was that we had trenches.
Well, remember, we had trenches at Petersburg was one of the first instances of trench warfare, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. But World War One was that type of fighting, but with fully automatic belt-fed weapons, modern explosive artillery shells, and yeah, it's wasn't smart. Just wasn't smart.
That wasn't smart. Well, that's the crazy thing, because like the Battle of the Somme happened in started in July 1916. The war had already been going on basically for 2 years. It's like, really? You're gonna try this mass attack after 2 fucking years of witnessing what happened? Now, I know that it was kind of an eerie similarity to Gettysburg, Pickett's charge, where I think the British High Command thought that this massive artillery bombardment had weakened the German positions, when in fact it didn't. Like, it absolutely did not weaken the German positions whatsoever. So, and that's why they had 60,000 men cut down within a few hours. Like, fucking 60,000 human beings just cut down, mostly wounded, but still.
Yeah, terrible.
So, the fact is that if there were ghoulish creatures in no man's land, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, ghouls and zombies. I don't know. I just don't know how that would happen though, as far as zombies go. You know what I mean? Like, I know it's possible for a parasite or a fungus to control the bodies of lesser creatures like ants or other insects, maybe even some types of fish I've heard of too. But to control a complex organism like a human being, it would have to be far more sophisticated. And I don't think that there's anything on this planet that would do it. I mean, it would kill you before it was able to control you.
Right. I mean, if they existed, because I bet there were like some survivors in no man's land who didn't want to fight each other anymore. Or probably the more plausible explanation is they totally flipped their lid, and so they were they were just like feasting on like wounded soldiers to
Yeah, I mean,
survive.
also you got to remember how hungry a lot of those people were. They were fucking starving out there in those trenches. It was cold, and you burn way more calories when you're cold.
Yeah,
Their literal flesh is rotting off of them for being in those wet trenches all the time. I mean, you ever heard of trench foot? That's where it comes from. It comes from World War One, when your feet are constantly wet with a combination of frostbite, and your flesh literally rots off of your feet. And that can also spread to other areas of your body through infection in the blood and everything. So it wouldn't surprise me that these hungry, insanely hungry people were feasting on a wounded soldier, um, because they probably just lost their fucking minds. Hot, covered in sores and wounds and whatever, infected, delirious, high fevers. They probably, I mean, if I saw that, I'd probably mistake them for zombies too, honestly. But these were probably just deranged, sick people, that wounded, sick, hungry people.
yep.
You know what I mean? Anyway,
But yeah, so we have another one here. So we've talked about what appears to be some specters. We talked about some
zombies.
zombie like insane, shell shocked, beyond irreparably damaged soldiers. Now we have a very famous beast called the Beast of Gévaudan. It's in France. So between 1765 and 1767, an unknown creature killed over 100 people in a rural region of France and captivated a horrified world. So, yeah, and of course in French it's called La Bête du Gévaudan. So, of course, a lot of modern scholars try to describe it as some kind of wolf, but one apparent person who apparently witnessed it said it was, quote, like a wolf, yet not a wolf. And look, rural people are going to know animals, especially in that time period, because you live around them all the time. So the first apparently recorded fatal attack was in 1760. Well, okay, so it's 1764 when a 14-year-old shepherdess, Jean Boulet, tended a flock of sheep. So 2 months prior, a young woman tending cattle was attacked by a creature like a wolf, yet not a wolf, but escaped because the herd defended her. So I guess I'm not sure what kind of herd. It's a different person. And so these attacks, it's kind of wartime related because these attacks occurred basically at the tail end of the French and Indian War, where of course France was, defeated and essentially exiled from the North American continent by the by the British. They had also lost battles to Prussia and the British and lost other overseas colonies. So some people say the beast might have been a foil for the monarchy to rally around, to distract people from the horrific failures of the military failures that had occurred that decade. Apparently this beast, the Bête Féroce, ferocious beast, attacked and partially ate women and the young, according to reports, but lone adult men were also suspects. So I guess it targeted the weak and isolated, which is why it would attack young and women and then men who are by themselves.
Yeah, but why would it attack a shepherd and a flock of sheep and not kill one of the sheep and just try to go after the shepherd?
That's a good point. That's a very interesting point.
It's much easier to take down a friggin' sheep and drag it off than to try to target the human being in the group.
Well, yeah, so apparently this targeted humans, honestly. The terrified populace of Gévaudan did not sit idle. Bounties were offered, and hunters combed the countryside looking for the creature. In 1764, hours after a mauling, the beast was seen at Chateau de la Baume, stalking a herdsman. So, and by the way, this is from history.com. So, it's not some, what some, it's mainstream enough for most people, I guess. But it was stalking a herdsman. So, yet again, apparently tracking the human and not, like you said, it'd be easier to get a sheep. Hunters followed the animal into the estate's woods and flushed the animal into the open. They fired a volley of musket shots at it, but however, the beast rose and ran off. So apparently, after a fall, it rose and ran off. So apparently, the beast attacked 10-year-old Jacques Portefeuille and a group of 7 friends, ranging from 8 to 12. However, apparently the children counterattacked with sticks and stones, driving off the creature. They were actually rewarded by King Louis the 15th. So that's wild. So yeah, I think there's a possibility that some of this was, of course, like they said, a foil for the French government's horrific failures. So a beast killing women and children in the countryside might be enough to get people stirred up.
Or could it
Uh,
have been some crazy person in wolf furs?
yeah, because again, it was only targeting humans, so that's wild.
I mean, if it was like a wolf or a pack of wolves, they would have been taking down the livestock, not necessarily people, unless a person got caught out there by themselves or whatever. You know,
Right, right.
I mean, ever since
Uh,
we started developing weapons and especially ranged weapons, predatory animals try to steer clear of people for the most part. They're starving or the person is an easy target, like they're isolated, alone. You know,
right.
so
Yeah, so that's
you know what? It actually reminds me of a story I heard about a werewolf in Paris that
yeah.
they talked about. I don't remember when it was. It was I don't know, 1600s maybe, 17. Anyway, it was killing people inside of Paris proper, like inside the city. And they'd hear the howls at night and all kinds of stuff within the city. And they kept sending bands out to try to track this thing down. They couldn't find it. Turns out it was a pack of wolves that got into the city, like through the gates somehow, or maybe through a hole in the defenses or something, and ended up setting up shop down in the catacombs. So like they were denning down there in the catacombs,
Oh, that's wild.
and they would come out at night and attack people or animals, whatever they could find they were eating. Yep. But they hunted them all down and killed them.
Oh yeah, and then they probably roasted their meat because they're all starving to death.
Were you aware that when they in the old part of the catacombs, they buried so many people down there that it was starting to contaminate the city's water supply? So
No, I didn't know that.
yeah, so the emperor ordered that all of those bodies be dug up and moved outside of the city. And then later on they moved like all those bodies and then some back in, but they were basically skeletons at the time. They were just
Oh,
bones when they moved them back in.
oh yeah, yeah, because there's thousands of just skulls throughout the Paris underground.
There's millions, dude. They estimate that and I think this what I was just talking about with the bodies contaminating the water, that was back during like the Black Plague and shit. Like so many
Yeah,
people were dying that they had nowhere to put the bodies. And there wasn't enough wood to burn them all. So they just started throwing them down in the catacombs.
well, and there is in some parts of France and Europe, like priests were blessing the rivers as like holy ground and throwing bodies in the river.
Yeah, and anybody that's not familiar Wilderness survival. You don't want to drink water with a rotting corpse of any kind floating in it.
Nope.
It's not good for you. Gets you very sick. Probably kill you.
Frowned upon.
Yeah. um.
So, yeah, there's a few more stories here. Apparently, there was a young girl in 1765, a 20-year-old, who was armed with a bayonet affixed to a pole. Marie Jeanne Vallée. She's attacked by the beast and impaled it. And she actually has a name. She was called the Amazon and the Maid of Gévaudan. So, interesting stuff.
You ever heard of the Vietnam rock ape?
I have not.
Number 2 on my list here, Vietnam rock ape. So, of all the sightings of mysterious creatures in wartime, none is more widely reported than the rock apes of Vietnam. Throughout the Vietnam War, fighters on both sides of the conflict regularly encountered large bipedal apes in the dense jungle. Lodge. So, bizarrely, Vietnam is home to no such wild apes. Even before conflict found its way to the jungles of Vietnam, there had been a long local tradition of strange creatures lurking in the wilderness. Various names have been assigned to these creatures by local peoples, including Atutut and Ujit, or forest people. Particularly cited within the Vu Quang Nature Reserve, such stories described muscular bipedal beings with ape-like features around 6 foot tall and covered in reddish-brown hair, excepting the knees, soles of the feet, hands, and face. So these sound much like the American Bigfoot, only shorter. Probably 2 to 3 feet shorter. Only 6 foot tall. Not that impressive, but anyway.
Good enough for American basketball, I guess.
Not really. Most of those basketball players are +7. 7 plus. So
Fine. Guess they'll have to settle for golf or something. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe. So, a commonly reported trait on the forest people is their displays of boldness and, on occasion, aggression. In Borneo, where the creatures are also claimed to exist, witnesses state that they do occasionally kill humans. Whilst the locals of these regions consider the creatures to be a fact of life, the Batutut was relatively unknown to the outside world. That was until the war pushed its way into the creature's supposed habitat. Among American soldiers, the creatures were known as rock apes, supposedly their propensity to hurl rocks at the soldiers. In the decades after the Vietnam War, veteran testimonies of encounters with these creatures are commonplace. One such veteran, who served as an airborne infantry squad leader with the 101st Airborne in 1968 and 69, described seeing numerous brown and reddish brown rock apes around the Ashau Valley. Although sightings of the creatures were common, they were likely never killed. As silence was the rule of the jungle, unnecessary gunfire was to be avoided at all cost. According to the eyewitness, the higher echelons of command wanted confirmed body counts and not mysterious creature sightings. As such, many rock ape sightings were unreported at the time. Another testimony comes from Michael Kelly, who served from 69 to 70. In the year 2000, he described how 8 rock apes surprised a squadron of his platoon, or a squad of his platoon. We don't call them squadrons. So a squad of his platoon, resulting in open fire being launched at the creatures, at first believing the mysterious apes to be the enemy. Being the correct height, they looked very much like soldiers in khaki. The firing had been nonstop as the creatures hurled themselves through the trees. In Kelly's own words, quote, All except one was light brown to reddish brown in color and about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. One dark, almost black male remained fighting to protect the other's retreat, and he was flying through the branches and rushing with his teeth bared.
Crazy.
Hmm. So all that shooting, and this thing still had the balls to fucking charge.
He he was fighting for his jungle. Fighting for his jungle home.
You know what I think? I think the ones that ran were children, and I think the one that charged was probably the mother or an adult of some type, whatever.
Right.
Save
Right. Yeah,
children.
that makes
Dude,
sense.
I'm convinced like Bigfoot or like creatures are real. I've seen one with my own eyes. I found
When?
tracks when I think I was 13, 14 in Maine. I've told the story on here before. I was at my
No,
friend Chris's house.
I must have been AWOL for that one.
Maybe. I don't remember. Uh yeah. So that was the one I saw. And then when I was in Colorado, I was out on a training exercise and out in the mountains, and we ran across a sandy, dry creek bed, and there were plain as day fucking tracks going right across the sandbar.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this. It's kind of this large thread about Batutut. Interesting name. Yeah. So there's another one here. John McKinnon, an orangutan specialist, stumbled upon tracks that he thought may be Batutut while searching in the Malaysian state of Sabah. He felt unease and avoided that area for the rest of his expedition, and it gives some of his account. For example, he was saying that he went on the far side of a river he'd never ventured before. Path was good. However, he suddenly stopped dead, amazed at what he saw. He knelt down to examine the disturbing footprint in the earth. A print so like a man's, yet so definitely not a man's that my skin crept, and I felt strong desire to head home. The print was roughly triangular in shape, about 6 inches long by 4 across. The toes looked quite human, as did the shapely heel, but the sole was both too short and too broad to be that of a man, and the big toe was on the opposite side of what seemed to be the arch of the foot. So he was researching other, sort of gorilla, apes, etc. species, and apparently came across those footprints.
Hmm. Hey, did you do this one already? The Morbach monster? Morbach?
Doesn't sound familiar.
Is that the one you were talking about in where the townspeople hunted it down? Only that was in France, wasn't it? I think this one, yeah, no, this one's in Germany.
Oh no, I haven't talked about this one yet.
Dude, the Morbach monster, and it's a similar story to the one in France, except this one has a backstory, like a legend, a local legend.
Right?
Let's see here. The German town of Wittlich is home to a strange legend, which might not be a legend at all if U.S. soldiers stationed in the area to be believed. According to the story, a deserter from Napoleon's army found his way to the town, where he attacked and murdered a local farmer and his wife. However, before the farmer's wife drew her last breath, she cast a curse on the feral farmer, turning him into a monstrous wolf. Mad with rage, the creature rampaged through the countryside until a mob of townsfolk hunted it down and killed it. The story is fairly well known. A local American football team even called themselves the Morbach Monsters, but not particularly exceptional by the standards of werewolf lore. More interesting are the experiences of American servicemen stationed at the nearby Hahn Air Base during the Cold War. Apparently, a number of the American troops saw a mysterious wolf-like creature while patrolling the forest edges of the base. According to two anonymous accounts collected by the University of Pittsburgh, military policemen investigating a perimeter alarm stumbled upon a dog-like animal which stood up on its hind legs and looked at them. The creature then took 3 long leaping steps and jumped over a high fence. The accounts differ on the exact height of the fence, but agree that it was taller than a man. The beast then disappeared into the forest. A sniffing dog was brought in, but it went berserk with fear, refusing to track the creature. University of Maine's anthropologist Matthias Burgard subsequently collected several other stories from U.S. servicemen who said they had seen strange animals or odd movements deep in the woods. One airman said he had been stalked by a hidden howling beast while walking his dogs. Another witness rejected the theory that the Americans might have been startled by local wild hogs. Quote, I grew up on a farm in the USA and this was no hog. Yet another serviceman offered Burgard an alternate explanation for at least some of the sightings. It was always fun to scare the new guys with stories of werewolf and then make them do security check of the perimeter on foot. One of our canines was this big black Bouvier with bloodshot eyes. We would always send that dog's handler to meet the new guys. So they used the story to fuck with the new guys. Still there, Ben? Did I lose you? Let's see here. Maybe I'll read one more. Then maybe we'll call it a night. British zoologist. Red ape, McKinnon. Yeah. Some dragon. Snake. Kraken. Mist. Ooh, how about Russia's Bigfoot? Not a very long one. So, not content with their own not content with their own Loch Ness. The Russians also have their own Bigfoot-like creature known as the Almas. These short, ape-like men supposedly inhabit Central Asia's rugged Pamir Mountains. One of the most famous Alma sightings came in 1925 when General Mikhail Topilsky was hunting pockets of anti-Soviet resistance holding out in the area. While interrogating a captured guerrilla, Topilsky was told that the rebels had supposedly been attacked by strange creatures in a nearby cave. Intrigued, Topilsky decided to investigate and soon found an unusual dead body. Anthropologist Myra Shackley described it in her book Still Living. So, the body belonged to a male creature, 165 to 170 centimeters tall, which is about 5'5". Elderly or even old, judging by the grayish color of the hair in several places. The chest was covered with brownish hair and the belly with grayish hair. In general, the hair was very thick without any underfur. There was least hair on the buttocks, from which fact our doctor deduced that the creature sat like a human being. There was most hair on the hips. The knees were completely bare of hair and had callus growths on them. The whole foot, including the sole, was quite hairless and was covered by hard brown skin. The hair got thinner near the hand, and the palms had none at all, but only callous skin. The color of the face was dark, and the creature had neither beard nor mustache. Unfortunately, Topilsky apparently didn't have a camera and decided not to skin decided not to skin the corpse as he had initially planned. Instead, he ordered his men to bury it, casually destroying the only evidence that this story wasn't completely made up. But if Russian Bigfoot does exist, at least we can say he doesn't have a mustache. Yeah, we could say he doesn't have a mustache. I don't know what's going on, but it appears we have lost Ben. So I think we're gonna call this one. I think we've been through enough little short stories here. Oh man, my back hurts. So if you like listening to me and Ben and my brother, and you want to hear more, please support us by liking and following on whatever platform you listen to us on, whether that be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever. You can hit us up at supernaturalbeerbros@gmail.com or on the DMs on Instagram at SBBpod. I believe that's it. So this has been Supernatural Beer Bros Podcast. Ben and I are signing out.